Final unit of microeconomics, we're going to be covering market failures and how the government actually deals with market failures. Market failures are just basically when the free market fails. It's when the free market fails to actually give what society actually wants. So there's different types of market failures. We're going to cover how the government deals with them because sometimes government intervention is necessary to actually deal with these market failures. So socially efficient is basically when every decision action has benefits and costs, and we can graph those benefits and costs. So here is a quick graph: quantity, price, but this time marginal cost and marginal benefit. So make sure you remember this. There's no MR equals MC. It's just marginal benefit and marginal cost. Where they meet is equilibrium, quantity, price. Pretty similar. You should be pretty well known on this. This graph operates pretty similar. If the price is ever above, we have a surplus; price below, shortage; deadweight loss. Everything applies that you know of supply and demand. So now we have market failures. Market failure is when the free market fails to provide society's wants and needs, and we're going to cover the different types of market failures here. So there's 4 different types of market failures. Public goods, which we'll cover; externalities, which are basically the side effects of a policy action; imperfect competition, like oligopoly, monopolistic competition, monopolies; and inequality. So we're going to cover all of these different market failures and how the government deals with them. So first, it's externalities. Externality is basically an effect from an action. So for example, let's say a company pollutes in a lake. Their benefit is pretty small. They get more profits, I guess, when they produce, but there's huge cost to society. There's more environmental harms, there's air pollution, huge issues for society. So there's negative ramifications, and more negative ramifications than positive. So in this situation, it would be a negative externality. What is a negative externality? It's just when there's more negative consequences to society than positive benefits. A positive externality is when there's more benefits to society than negative consequences. So, for example, a positive externality would be giving vaccines to everyone or providing water to everyone. That would be a huge positive externality. It's when there's more positive benefits to society than negative. So, how do we determine if there's a negative or positive externality? For a negative externality graph, and here's a graph, remember marginal benefit, marginal cost graph, we're going to be expanding on that here. On the x-axis is quantity, y-axis is price. This time you're graphing marginal social benefit, marginal private cost, and marginal social cost. To determine if it's a negative or positive externality, you have to look at the marginal social cost and marginal private cost. If marginal social cost is above marginal private cost, we have a negative externality. This is because there's more cost to society, marginal social cost, than there is to the actual firm or private firm with the marginal private cost. So make sure you remember, for negative externality, a marginal social cost curve will be higher than a marginal private cost. And this purple area here is the actual deadweight loss, basically, the difference between the two. So how do you determine if it's a positive externality? Pretty similar. It's when a positive externality is when the marginal social benefit, this blue line on top, is above the marginal private benefit, this blue line on the bottom. So make sure you remember negative externality, marginal social cost is above; positive externality, marginal social benefit is above. That's how you determine if it's positive externality or negative externality. So now how does the government actually deal with externalities? For positive externality, the government fixes them by providing incentives because they want more of the positive externality. So for example, they provide subsidies or money to firms for positive externality. This is because they want more of those positive externalities. They want more positive benefits. And because of that, they want to incentivize those positive benefits. So make sure you remember, positive externalities you want to incentivize by providing subsidies or money. For negative externalities, governments tax, either a per unit tax or a lump sum tax. This is because they want to disincentivize things like that. So for example, cigarettes. The government taxes cigarettes immensely because they want to disincentivize people from smoking and using cigarettes. So make sure you remember, negative externality, governments tax negative externalities, and governments provide subsidies for positive externalities. So now there's 2 different types of goods that the government or private firms provide. goods. For definition, a public sector is the part of the economy that is primarily controlled by the government, so the government controls the public sector, and the private sector is the free market sector of the economy, where businesses and companies and private individuals operate. So remember, public sector is government, private sector is individuals and businesses. Public goods are goods provided by the government and are free for everyone. So think police, military education, a lot of different services that the government provides, roads, all public goods. Anything that is free and provided by the government is a public good. A private good is goods you have to pay for, things like food, housing, water, etc. It's just things you have to pay for. Typically, you have to pay companies. Make sure you can identify public and private goods. Public goods are always free and provided by the government. You cannot exclude anyone from public goods. Private goods are excludable, typically by price, and you have to pay for private goods. So make sure you can identify public and private goods. Now we have the free rider problem. It's that the idea that people abuse and use public goods too much without providing much to society themselves. So everyone takes advantage of public goods, but they don't necessarily provide that much of use to society. That's the free rider problem. So now we have the monopolies, monopolistic competition, oligopoly. Basically, imperfect competition. That is also market failure because it fights competition, it creates deadly loss, and is inefficient. We always want perfect competition. So how does the government get involved? Well, they get involved in two ways: antitrust laws and price ceilings and price control. Antitrust laws are laws that try to break up and prevent monopolies. So just make sure you remember antitrust laws try to break up monopolies and monopolistic competition oligopolies. They try to promote competition. Price ceilings and price control regulate how much profit these imperfect competition firms can actually make. So when the government installs price controls, they're trying to limit the profits that these other firms are making. For price controls, there's two different places the government can put the price. They can put a price at ATC, which would be normal profit / break even. Since price is at ATC, you're making as much as you cost, or price is equal to marginal cost. This is the socially optimal point and socially efficient point. So just make sure you remember, for imperfect competition, when governments are trying to intervene, price equals ATC is a normal profit break even. Price equals MC is a socially optimal point for governments. Finally, we have inequality, and the last market failure is inequality in wealth distribution. Inequality just means that wealth is distributed unfairly amongst the population, and it's perfectly normal, but the level of inequality is actually what creates the market failure. So here is a Lorenz curve. On the x-axis is the share of income from lowest to highest, and here's the share of income earned. So, and it basically just illustrates inequality, so to speak. This black dashed line you see here, this is perfect equality. That means we have the ideal amount of equality. This is the ideal scenario where it's not market failure. Blue line is some inequality, but it's feasible. It's not terrible. We're always going to have inequality in a society. So this blue line's not bad. And then the red line is the actual income distribution in the United States. The more curved and more space the lines take up, kind of like the red line, the more inequality you have. The way to calculate it is actually finding the area from the perfect equality line to the actual line. This area that kind of looks like a banana peel if you look at it is called a Gini coefficient. And depending on a Gini coefficient, that shows you the level of inequality you have in a society. All you really need to know is that Lorenz curve shows inequality. The further it is away from this black dashed line, more inequality, and the Gini coefficient calculates inequality. I highly doubt you're ever going to have to calculate the Gini coefficient, but if you do, just make sure you know it's the area between these two curves like this. To combat inequality, the government uses a different type of taxation. So there's two different types of taxation. A regressive type of taxation is a form of taxation that taxes the poor more than the rich proportionally, and it increases inequality. Think, for example, sales tax or property tax. These are regressive taxation because it taxes the poor more proportionally than the rich. Progressive taxation is a form of taxation that taxes the rich more than the poor. So think income tax. Income tax is a progressive tax because of income bracket. So just make sure you know progressive taxation decreases inequality, regressive taxation increases inequality. And that's everything from microeconomics. For this unit in particular, just make sure you remember all of the market failures, public goods, externalities, imperfect competition, and inequality. Make sure you remember marginal social costs, marginal private costs, how to identify negative and positive externalities, how to deal with them, public and private goods, how to identify public and private goods, antitrust laws and price ceilings, where to place the price ceilings and price floors, and inequality in the Lorenz curve, and taxes. That's about all you need to know for this unit. I have a few questions in the description for you to review so that you can actually get these concepts nailed into your head. And now, if you're taking macroeconomics, you'll actually begin those units. Macroeconomics Unit 1 is the exact same as Micro Unit 1, but I would still recommend you cover it again and then go over Macro Unit 2.